My name is Richard Kaleski. I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, and spent my childhood there. I started at Oakland Elementary, Laurie for middle school, and Fortson for high school. The neighborhood was kind of a mixture, multi-ethnic, mostly just about all blue collar. There was a couple white collar professionals in our neighborhood, but basically it was just blue collar, Polish American. My parents had a fair amount of Polish Americans within walking distance of our home in the neighborhood, and there was a lot of Italian Americans. Polish Americans and Italian Americans tend to be the predominant nationalities throughout school. I lived there till, gosh, I was 20. Uncle Sam decided I should take a step forward, and so I was drafted in the service for 2 years. I spent most of the time in Korea. I served in the Army Engineers. After being released from the Army, I returned to Dearborn and lived there probably about 14 years or so. I got married and lived in the family home, and then eventually moved to Milford, Michigan. When I moved to Milford, I was working in public relations for New Detroit, and then after that, I went back to the newspaper business and worked for a publication that was located in the Lakes area. And I stayed there for 10, 12 years. And then from there, I moved to Georgia. I lived on an island called St. Simons and created a newspaper there and lived there for about 5 years, and then came back to Michigan and lived in Lake Orion, working for a newspaper I previously worked for. And then later I ended up working for another newspaper. And then shortly thereafter I retired, and just before retiring I moved to Hamtramck. I was married to Dawn, who was a native Detroiter, and we had 3 children, Keely, the eldest, Michael, the middle child, and Greg, the youngest. And our marriage lasted for about 13 years, and then I moved to Milford. I moved to Hamtramck approximately about the mid-'80s, I believe it was. Wherever I've lived, I've always felt a need, a premonition to be an activist in the community. It's kind of a given that I was raised by my parents to believe in. And so I've always been the walking chamber of commerce of wherever I've lived, and Hamtramck was no different. The first effort I did in Hamtramck was work for the Goodfellows newspaper sale the first year I was here. And then I got involved in politics, which I'm a political junkie, if you will, and Gary Zitch came along and ran for office. I worked in his campaigns, all of his campaigns, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Met a lot of people in the process, and in addition to that, I became active in Preserve Our Park, and I encourage them to become a part of creating a greenway trail system within the city of Hamtramck that would connect to a trail system in Detroit. I suppose biking would be considered a hobby for me. Other than this year, each year I go on a week-long voyage somewhere for a bike trip, one of the states of the Union. One year, my son and I went on one in Europe from Budapest and ended up in Krakow, Poland. But for the most part, I've probably been ridden in at least half, if not two-thirds, of all the states in the Union, and it's a great sport. Aside from the obvious physical part, it just, you meet some wonderful people. You camp out for the most part, and you just get to see parts of the country that you wouldn't normally see, because the routing is usually through small towns and under-traveled highways, so it makes it quite safe. But it's a fun sport. The first time I visited the Hamtramck Library was probably a couple months after I'd arrived. Took a little while, I guess, to get settled and get my bearings, but I was quite impressed with the library. The reason I stayed and continue to stay in Hamtramck is probably in part because of my roots. My father, I have two older sisters, right? And when they were born and growing in their early childhood, they learned Polish from my parents as well as English. And my eldest sister, when she was in kindergarten, she had a WASP teacher who thought anybody that spoke a foreign language was strange. And one day my sister got confused about something and uttered something in Polish, and the teacher thought she was swearing at her. And so she called in my parents, and my dad was so insulted because being an American was of utmost importance to him. And so therefore, my brother and I never learned Polish. It was a no-no. My parents spoke Polish, my relatives spoke Polish, but other than my dad swearing in Polish when he hit his finger with a hammer or something, that's about the only words of Polish I ever learned. And so coming to Hamtramck, it was kind of something I missed, if you will, in my youth. Both my parents emigrated from Poland, and so I'm a first-generation American. People look for legacies. Like my dad used to say, once you get old, you worry about people remembering you. I don't know. I don't think in terms of a legacy for myself. I just hope that, it become Hamtramck's a better place after I leave than it was before I came, and that's good enough for me.